city does not wash away the grime. It merely gives it a varnished, deceptive sheen. Under the flickering amber glow of street lamps that hum with a low, electrical fatigue, a man stands outside a monolithic glass tower. Inside that towering monument of steel and corporate ambition, marble floors mirror the cold geometry of the ceiling, and executives sit in leather chairs, toasting their triumphs with aged scotch. They are men and women whose signatures have ruined families, whose corporate spreadsheets have treated human lives as acceptable margins of error, and whose private lives are monuments to unchecked avarice. They drive automobiles whose engines purr like caged panthers, and they return each night to penthouses where the night sky stretches out below them like a conquered territory. Now, shift the gaze downward, toward the damp pavement where the observer stands. A few blocks away, in a cramped, poorly ventilated apartment with peeling wallpaper, another human being sits at a warped wooden kitchen table. This person spends their evenings balancing ledgers down to the single digit, agonizing over the rising cost of groceries, medication, and rent. This person is unfailingly honest. They return dropped wallets to strangers. They pay every cent of their taxes with trembling punctuality. They apologize when they have done no wrong, and they lie awake at night, tormented by the fear that they might have inadvertently caused someone pain. Look closely at this juxtaposition. For millennia, humanity has been spoon-fed a comforting, beautiful lie. The cosmic ledger balances. The moral myth dictates that honesty is the ultimate currency, that hard work is an infallible seed that invariably yields a harvest of gold, and that the universe operates as a benevolent schoolmaster rewarding the righteous and punishing the wicked. Yet, observe the immediate physical reality. The liars run the corporations. The cheaters sit in the executive suites. The unscrupulous rise like oil on water, while the gentle, the hyper-conscientious, and the fundamentally decent are perpetually bogged down in a mire of financial anxiety and quiet desperation. Something does not add up. If one relies on the conventional arithmetic of morality, the equations of existence collapse into absurdity. Millions of human beings trudge through their lives waiting for karma to finally intercept the wicked, watching year after year as the wicked only grow wealthier, bolder, and more untouchable. The comforting platitudes about cosmic justice sound increasingly hollow against the backdrop of an indifferent world. To break free from this matrix of disappointment, one must confront a terrifying paradox. What if everything you have been told about success is precisely backwards? What if the reason you are struggling is not because you are lazy, uninspired, or untalented, but because you are, in the purest sense of the word, too good? To understand why the moral paradigm of success fails so catastrophically, one must abandon human ethics and examine the mechanics of reality through a completely different lens. The universe is not a moral courtroom. It is a mechanical engine. Consider electricity. Does an electrical current possess a moral conscience? Does the blinding, pulsing energy surging through a high-voltage copper wire pause to evaluate the ethical character of the entity it is about to power? Does it check credentials to determine whether it is about to illuminate a sterile hospital ward where a surgeon is frantically saving a child's life? Or whether it is about to energize an electric chair in a maximum security prison execution chamber? Of course not. Electricity is utterly indifferent to morality. It flows wherever the circuit is complete. It respects only conductivity, resistance, and the integrity of the path. Wherever the resistance is lowest and the pathway is clear, if the current rushes forward with absolute, unhesitating fury. The exact same mechanical principle governs wealth, power, manifestation, and every form of success in the physical realm. Reality does not respond to whether an individual is a saint or a villain, a philanthropist or a fraud. Reality responds to vibrational clarity and internal certainty. Why, then, do the ruthless succeed while the ethical struggle? Why does the cheat manifest abundance with such terrifying ease? To answer this, one must trace the mechanics of human intention using recursive thought. Why does an unethical person manifest power so effortlessly? Because their internal architecture is unified. When a predatory individual desires wealth, every fiber of their being, every neuron in their brain, and every drop drop of their biological energy aligns behind that single, unclouded objective. There is no internal committee holding a debate in their mind. There is no quiet, nagging voice whispering, "Do I deserve this? Will someone get hurt if I take this? Are people going to judge me for being greedy?" Their signal is pure, concentrated, and entirely free of internal static. How does the ethical person operate by contrast? When a conscientious person desires success, their mind immediately fractures into a civil war. They want the promotion, but they feel guilty about stepping over a colleague. They want to charge what their work is worth, but they fear being perceived as selfish. They take one step forward in ambition, and 2 steps backward in self-doubt. Why does this internal division occur? Because society has trained the conscientious mind to view its own desires with suspicion. The good person is trapped in a loop of self-policing. Every ambition is filtered through a sieve of moral anxiety. This creates what physicists of consciousness call vibrational interference. If you broadcast 2 opposing frequencies simultaneously, one shouting, "I want abundance," and the other whispering, "I am bad for wanting it," the 2 waves cancel each other out in the ether of reality. The net result is zero. Static. White noise. The universe, acting as a massive, impartial amplification system, simply echoes back the confusion. The ruthless person broadcasts a laser beam. The conscientious person broadcasts a fragmented fog. Reality bends toward the laser beam not because the laser is morally superior, but because the laser possesses structural integrity. Once this mechanical truth is grasped, the illusion of cosmic injustice dissolves, replaced by the realization that reality is simply following the laws of its own circuitry. To witness this mechanical law in motion, consider the historical account of 2 contemporary merchants operating in a bustling Mediterranean port city during the height of maritime trade expansion. The first merchant was known throughout the province as Julian the Just. Julian was a man of impeccable character. Every contract he drafted was scrupulously fair. Every ledger he kept was transparent down to the last copper coin. He gave generously to orphans, never cheated a competitor, and spent his evenings in quiet prayer, asking the divine to bless his honest labors. Yet, Julian's business perpetually skirted the edge of insolvency. When he planned to purchase a fleet of cargo ships to expand his trade routes, he would hesitate for weeks, agonizing over whether outbidding a rival merchant would constitute an unfair burden upon that rival's family. He spent months auditing his own intentions, terrified that a hint of ego might taint his endeavors. The second merchant was Cassian the Bold. Cassian possessed no moral compass to speak of. He viewed treaties as temporary inconveniences and competitors as obstacles to be dismantled. When Cassian saw an opportunity to acquire a prime dockside warehouse, he did not ponder the karmic consequences. He did not lose sleep wondering if the previous owner would suffer. He marched directly to the magistrates, leveraged every asset he possessed, utilized aggressive legal maneuvers, and seized the property within 48 hours. Townspeople whispered of Cassian's ruthlessness. They shook their heads and muttered that karma would eventually drag him down into the gutter. They watched Julian the Just with pity and admiration, certain that his virtue would eventually be rewarded by a benevolent cosmos. Years passed. The cosmic ledger, as the townspeople imagined it, never materialized. Cassian's fleet grew until it dominated the entire coastline. He lived in a sprawling cliffside villa, his coffers overflowing with gold, moving through the world with an air of absolute, unshakable dominion. Julian the Just, meanwhile, lost his final warehouse to a minor market shift because he had delayed his defensive investments out of ethical hesitation. He died in quiet obscurity, his heart heavy with the bitter conviction that the universe favored monsters. Was the universe punishing Julian for being good? Was it rewarding Cassian for being evil? No. The universe was merely reading their respective circuits. Cassian moved through the marketplace with total internal coherence. When he wanted the warehouse, his entire biological and mental apparatus locked onto that single target with the precision of a guided missile. There was no internal friction, no self-doubt, no hesitation. His signal was crystal clear, and reality acting as a neutral amplifier bent to accommodate his certainty. Julian, despite his moral purity, was broadcasting a fractured frequency. His desire for success was perpetually hamstrung by his fear of his own ambition. His internal world was a battlefield of conflicting intentions. The mechanical laws of manifestation do not reward a broken circuit simply because the broken pieces happen to have good intentions. The realization of this mechanical reality can initially induce a profound sense of vertigo. It strips away the comforting blanket of cosmic paternalism and forces the soul to look directly at the machinery of existence, but within that vertigo lies the ultimate liberation. You do not need to abandon your integrity to achieve power. You do not need to become a monster to master reality. But you do need to stop apologizing for your existence, and you do not need to sabotage your own signal with endless internal policing. The path forward requires learning how to maintain your moral compass while eliminating the internal static that renders your efforts impotent. To embody this truth today, begin by auditing your own internal dialogue. The next time you desire an opportunity, a promotion, a creative breakthrough, or financial abundance, pause and observe the immediate counter-narrative that arises in your mind. Notice where you apologize, where you qualify your desires, and where you inject guilt into your ambitions. Recognize that this hesitation is not humility, it is static. It is the friction that prevents your current from flowing. As you navigate this inner transformation, remember that true power is not about dominating others, but about mastering the flow of energy within your own vessel. Take a moment now to center your awareness. If this exploration of the hidden mechanics of reality has resonated with your deepest intuitions, gently tap the like button below, and let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching from today. It is a powerful reminder that we are part of a global collective waking up to these deeper truths. We are only at the threshold. In the next chapter, we descend deeper into the invisible architecture of the mind, examining the precise nature of that vibrational static and why the very virtue you have been praised for your entire life may be the exact thing keeping you locked in quiet struggle. The machinery is humming. The circuit is about to close. Proceed to Chapter 2. The modern achiever moves through the corridors of daily existence with the frantic, exhausted energy of an artisan spinning a wheel that has somehow been thrown violently out of balance. Picture an open-plan office building at midnight. The fluorescent panels hum above rows of abandoned desks, casting a sterile, clinical pallor over the synthetic carpets. In a corner cubicle, a solitary figure sits hunched over a glowing monitor. Coffee cups, some half full, others crusty with dried dark sediment, litter the desk, like tiny monuments to endurance. This person's eyes are bloodshot, their shoulders knotted with tension, and their fingers fly across the mechanical keyboard with desperate velocity. They have worked 80 hours this week. They have sacrificed their weekends, postponed their health appointments, and neglected their primary relationships. By all the conventional metrics of the industrial age, they are pouring an ocean of sweat and labor into their vocation. Yet, when the quarterly evaluations arrive, the promotion goes to a colleague who leaves the building at 5 o'clock sharp every evening, a colleague who moves with an effortless, unsettling nonchalance, whose projects seem to glide effortlessly into fruition, while every step the overworker takes feels like dragging lead boots through quicksand. Watch this overworker closely when they encounter their failure. They do not merely feel disappointed, they collapse into a spiral of internal recrimination. Why am I not advancing? Is it because I am not smart enough? Did I phrase that proposal incorrectly? Should I have been more assertive? Or was I too aggressive? In that precise moment of agonizing rumination, a profound energetic phenomenon is occurring. The physical body is seated at a desk, but the internal consciousness resembles a turbulent sea lashed by opposing gales. One wave crashes forward, screaming for recognition, wealth, and expansion. Instantly, a counter-wave rises to smash it back into the depths, whispering of unworthiness, imposter syndrome, and the quiet guilt of desiring more than one's allotted share. This is the state of vibrational static. It is the invisible white noise of the human soul. Millions of individuals spend their lives operating under the delusion that physical exhaustion and moral diligence are the primary currencies of success. They do not realize that the universe does not measure the drops of sweat on a brow or the tears of frustration shed over a late-night spreadsheet. The universe listens only to the signal, and when the signal is fractured by internal static, the most magnificent architectural blueprints of ambition dissolve into thin air before they can ever take physical form. To dissect the anatomy of vibrational static, one must abandon superficial motivational platitudes and examine the mechanics of consciousness through rigorous psychological and philosophical inquiry. Why does the human mind, particularly the mind of the conscientious and ethical individual, generate this destructive interference pattern? To answer this, one must deploy recursive thinking. Ask why the mind doubts its own desires, and then ask why that doubt manifests as energetic friction in the physical world. When a human being is socialized within a culture that equates humility with self-effacement, the subconscious mind installs a profound architectural firewall. This firewall operates as an internal censor. Whenever the conscious mind projects a clear, bold desire such as an aspiration for extraordinary wealth, leadership, or influence, the subconscious censor immediately intercepts it. It triggers an automatic alarm. Desiring greatness is synonymous with greed. Wanting more than one's neighbor is a moral hazard. How does this psychological firewall translate into a physical and mechanical reality? Consciousness is not merely a passive observer of reality, it is an active broadcaster. Every thought, emotion, and core belief vibrates at a specific frequency, creating an electromagnetic and etheric field around the human vessel. When an individual desires success while simultaneously harboring guilt about that desire, they are executing a form of vibrational schizophrenia. They are pressing the accelerator to the floorboards while simultaneously locking the emergency brake. Why does this cancel out the manifestation process? Because reality operates on the principle of coherence. Imagine an acoustic chamber. If two tuning forks of identical pitch are struck, they amplify one another, creating a rich, resonant wave that fills the entire space. But if two tuning forks of conflicting frequencies are struck simultaneously, they generate a chaotic beating pattern, a destructive interference where the waves collide, cancel each other out, and collapse into silence. The human soul experiencing vibrational static is the acoustic chamber of conflicting tuning forks. One part of the consciousness broadcasts an expansive wave of ambition, the other broadcasts a contractive wave of unworthiness. The universe, acting as a massive, impartial amplification system, receives this chaotic, chopped-up transmission. It cannot amplify a signal that is tearing itself apart. Consequently, the external world remains frozen, unresponsive, and stagnant. The individual concludes that the world is unfair, failing to recognize that the stagnation is not a punishment from a deity, but the simple, mathematical consequence of a broken circuit broadcasting white noise. To observe the catastrophic mechanics of vibrational static in an institutional setting, consider the historical account of the Royal Academy of Navigation during the early years of oceanic exploration. The Academy was charged with selecting navigators who would command the Crown's flagship vessels across treacherous, uncharted waters. Among the candidates were two brilliant scholars, Master Alistair and Master Thaddeus. Master Alistair was a man of staggering intellect. He had memorized every star chart, calculated tide tables to the second, and possessed a theoretical understanding of maritime currents that surpassed even the senior instructors. Yet, Alistair was paralyzed by a chronic, low-grade terror of failure. Whenever he stood before the navigation board, his mind raced with internal anxieties. What if my calculations are off by a fraction of a degree? What if the storm hits before we reach the strait? Do I truly possess the fortitude to command men whose lives depend on my judgment? Alistair's internal world was a tempest of second-guessing. He spent hours rewriting his flight paths, drafting endless contingency notes, and agonizing over every conceivable catastrophe. Master Thaddeus, by contrast, possessed only average theoretical knowledge. He was not the most learned scholar in the academy, but Thaddeus possessed an unshakable, terrifyingly clean internal clarity. When he plotted a course across the open sea, his mind did not fragment into doubt. He selected a destination, aligned his instrument, and every fiber of his being locked onto the conviction of arrival. He did not waste a single ounce of mental energy auditing his own worthiness to captain a ship. When the final examination arrived, both men were placed in command of identical training galleons during a severe coastal squall. Master Alistair's vessel became a floating manifestation of his internal static. As the winds battered the hull, Alistair second-guessed his own helm commands. He shouted an order to tack port, immediately countermanded it with an order to starboard, and then froze, paralyzed by the fear that his decision would endanger the crew. The crew, sensing his internal fragmentation, lost confidence. The ship's movements became erratic, caught between competing maneuvers, until it drifted dangerously close to the jagged reefs and had to be towed back to harbor in disgrace. Master Thaddeus faced the identical squall. When the gale struck, his mind did not fracture. He gripped the wheel with absolute, undivided certainty. He issued clear, concise commands that brooked no hesitation. The crew, feeling the rock-solid coherence of their captain's focus, moved as a single organism. The ship cut through the mountainous waves not because Thaddeus was a superior mathematician, but because his unbroken signal allowed him to move through chaos with total structural integrity. Alistair sat on the docks afterward, weeping over his charts, cursing his lack of luck, convinced that the examiners were biased against true scholars. He could not comprehend that the reef had not wrecked his ship. His own vibrational static had steered him straight into the rocks. The dismantling of vibrational static is the single most urgent task for anyone seeking to transition from quiet struggle to effortless mastery. So long as you view your self-doubt as a noble form of humility, you will remain shackled to the very static that is drowning out your success. To embody this truth today, you must practice the art of signal purification. The next time you feel the familiar hum of anxiety, self-recrimination, or hesitation creeping into your consciousness as you pursue an objective, do not fight it with positive affirmations. Fighting doubt with forced positivity is just another form of friction. It is two opposing forces wrestling in the mud of your mind. Instead, observe the static with cold, clinical detachment. Acknowledge that the internal committee debating your worthiness is nothing more than old social programming echoing in an empty room. Breathe out the need for moral validation. Decide precisely what you want, strip away the apologies, and anchor your intent in absolute, unyielding clarity. A clear signal requires an empty channel. When you stop negotiating with your own ambitions, the universe stops negotiating with your results. As you begin to quiet this internal white noise, a new danger arises, one that is even more insidious, because it wears the mask of high responsibility. For most good people, the moment self-awareness is unleashed, it mutates into a relentless, self-flagellating prosecutor. The machinery of your consciousness is shifting gear. In the next chapter, we descend into the courtroom of the mind to examine the weaponized mirror of self-reflection, uncovering how past mistakes are kept alive through energetic quicksand and how to step out of the trap entirely. The white noise is fading. The signal is beginning to clear. Proceed to Chapter 3. The hour is 3 in the morning. The house is shrouded in a profound, velvety stillness, save for the rhythmic, distant ticking of a grandfather clock in the downstairs hallway. In a dimly lit bedroom, a woman lies wide awake, staring into the dark geometry of the ceiling. Her body is motionless, but inside the theater of her mind, a frantic, high-stakes courtroom trial is perpetually in session. She is prosecuting herself. The exhibit on trial is an innocuous remark she made 12 hours earlier during a high-level corporate strategy meeting. A senior executive had challenged her proposal, and instead of delivering a sharp, authoritative rebuttal, she had stumbled over her words, offered a timid concession, and retreated into silence. Now, in the solitary confinement of the small hours, her mind replays that fleeting moment with cinematic cruelty. It zooms in on the slight tremor in her voice, magnifies the lukewarm reaction of her peers, and weaves a sweeping, catastrophic narrative. You are fundamentally unequipped for leadership. You cower under pressure. Everyone saw your incompetence, and they are merely tolerating your presence until they can find someone stronger. Observe this phenomenon carefully. It feels noble. It feels like rigorous self-reflection, accountability, and maturity. Society has conditioned her to believe that torturing herself over past failures is the price one pays for personal growth. She believes that by acting as her own harshest critic, she is guarding against future humiliation. Yet, look at the physical and energetic toll of this nocturnal trial. Her palms are slick with cold sweat, her chest is tight with a low-grade, corrosive anxiety, and her vital life force is leaking out of her like blood from an unheated wound. This is the weaponized mirror. It is the tragic transformation of healthy self-awareness into an internal executioner. Millions of otherwise brilliant, conscientious individuals take the very tool designed to grant them clarity, introspection, and turn it into a medieval instrument of psychological torture. They stand before the mirror of memory not to admire their progress or correct their trajectory, but to scratch at old wounds until they bleed, convinced that this perpetual self-prosecution is the ultimate badge of a good and humble soul. To dismantle the mechanism of the weaponized mirror, one must apply rigorous psychological and philosophical inquiry. Why does the conscientious mind inevitably drift from constructive self-analysis into self-flagellation? To answer this, one must deploy recursive thinking, ask why the ego clings to shame, and then ask how that internal prosecution creates energetic quicksand in the physical realm. When an ethical individual makes a misstep, whether it is a social blunder, a professional failure, or a moral compromise, their ego experiences a profound dissonance. Because they hold themselves to an exacting standard of goodness, their identity cannot easily accommodate imperfection. To resolve this dissonance, the ego adopts a cunning survival strategy: preemptive self-punishment. The logic of the subconscious runs thus. If I punish myself ruthlessly before the world can punish me, I retain control. If I convince myself that I am flawed, I will never be caught off guard by my own incompetence. How does this psychological defense mechanism translate into a mechanical failure of manifestation? Consciousness is a creative medium. Whatever you focus your emotional energy upon, you amplify and project into your energetic field. When you spend hours replaying a past mistake, you are not healing it. You are feeding it. You are continuously supplying life force to an outdated timeline. Why does this result in energetic quicksand? Because every second spent in self-prosecution lowers your vibrational frequency into the dense, muddy mire of unworthiness. Imagine trying to sprint across a marshland while wearing heavy iron boots filled with lead shot. Each step you take sinks you deeper into the muck. The more you struggle against your perceived flaws with guilt and self-loathing, the deeper the quicksand pulls you. The universe, acting as an impartial amplification system, it does not evaluate the moral nobility of your self-flagellation. It simply registers the frequency you are broadcasting. If your frequency is saturated with shame, regret, and the conviction that you are fundamentally broken, reality responds by delivering circumstances that mirror and confirm that exact internal state. You remain trapped in a loop of stagnation, wondering why your hard work yields no fruit, entirely blind to the fact that you are executing your own potential every single night in the theater of your mind. To observe the paralyzing architecture of the weaponized mirror in historical context, consider the account of Master Julian, a master architect during the Italian Renaissance commissioned to design a grand cathedral in Florence. Julian was a genius of profound sensitivity. His previous creation, a civic bridge, had suffered a minor structural crack during an unexpected seismic tremor. No one was injured, and the bridge was easily reinforced within a week. Yet, Julian took the event as a catastrophic moral indictment of his soul. While other builders moved on to new commissions, Julian retreated to his workshop with a candle and a heavy heart. He began to keep a ledger not of his engineering calculations, but of every perceived error he had ever made in his career. Whenever a prospective patron approached him with a new commission, Julian's mind was paralyzed by the ghost of the cracked bridge. He would stare into his own architectural designs as though they were a hall of mirrors reflecting his inevitable failure. He spent years redrawing the same cathedral blueprints, paralyzed by the fear that a single miscalculated arch would bring down the entire edifice and expose him as a fraud. He overworked his apprentices out of nervous anxiety, second-guessed every mason, and constantly apologized to the city magistrates for his unworthiness. Meanwhile, a rival architect named Baldassare, a man of far lesser technical skill but absolute internal immunity to shame, secured the commission for the city's grandest piazza. Baldassare had made structural errors in the past as well. He had miscalculated load-bearing walls on early projects that had required costly teardowns. But Baldassare possessed no internal courtroom. When an error occurred, he looked at it, noted the mechanical flaw, adjusted his measurements, and immediately banished it from his mind. He did not set up camp in his past failures. He did not view a cracked wall as proof that his soul was fundamentally flawed. Consequently, Baldassare's energy remained clean, concentrated, and magnetic. The city officials, sensing his unshakable poise, entrusted him with monumental resources. Julian, the brilliant artist, died in his workshop with his master blueprints unfinished, crushed beneath the invisible weight of his own relentless self-prosecution. The cathedral he envisioned was never built. The tragedy was not that Julian lacked talent. The tragedy was that he had used his own genius to construct a prison of shame, locking himself inside a cell where the key was simply to forgive his own humanity and step back out into the light. The weaponized mirror is the ultimate silent killer of human potential. Until you smash that mirror and stop treating your consciousness like a perpetual courtroom, you will continue to bleed your vital energy into the phantom ghosts of yesterday. To embody this truth today, you must master the art of the clean break. The next time you catch yourself replaying an embarrassing moment, a past failure, or a perceived moral shortcoming, do not engage the prosecutor. Do not allow your mind to hold a hearing. Instead, practice radical, unfeeling emotional hygiene. Acknowledge the event with cold objectivity. That occurred. The circumstances demanded a level of awareness I did not yet possess. Then, draw a hard, impenetrable line across the ledger. Refuse to feed the memory another drop of your life force. Understand that beating yourself up does not make you a better person. It merely makes you a weaker, more exhausted instrument of creation. True accountability looks forward with unclouded vision. False guilt looks backward and chains your feet to the floor of the past. Take a breath. Feel the enormous reservoir of mental bandwidth that instantly becomes available the moment you drop the burden of your self-prosecution. We are standing at the threshold of a profound liberation. Understanding the trap of self-flagellation is only the first step. In the next chapter, we uncover the exact protocol discovered by Florence Scovel Shinn, a deceptively simple, razor-sharp practice that transforms past mistakes from energetic quicksand into the very fuel of manifestation. The courtroom is adjourned. The mirror is shattered. Proceed to Chapter 4. The rain drums a relentless, steady rhythm against the frosted window panes of a modest study in early 20th century New York. Inside, the room is thick with the scent of old paper, leather-bound folios, and the faint, dry fragrance of dried lavender. Seated at a cluttered oak desk is a woman whose name would later become a quiet legend among seekers of truth. Florence Scovel Shinn. She does not look like an untouchable mystic draped in esoteric robes or an academic insulated by ivory towers. Her clothes are practical, slightly worn at the cuffs. Her hair bears the slight disarray of someone who has spent hours wrestling with her own thoughts, and her eyes carry the unmistakable, luminous depth of a soul that has stared long and hard into the abyss of personal failure. Before her lies a journal filled with frantic, ink-stained entries, pages written years prior during her darkest seasons of despair, financial instability, and emotional entanglement. She had been a woman acquainted with the gutter of self-reproach. She had known the suffocating weight of addiction, the sting of humiliating professional missteps, and the agonizing regret of having hurt those she held most dear. By all standard societal metrics of her era, she was a candidate for quiet obscurity, a spirit broken upon the wheel of her own moral miscalculations. Yet, observe her posture now. Her shoulders are squared, her breath is deep and even, and her pen moves across fresh parchment with an absolute, unhesitating fluidity. How did she cross the immense chasm from a life paralyzed by shame to a state of radiant, unstoppable manifestation? The answer does not lie in a sudden infusion of moral perfection or an immaculate theological awakening. Florence Scovel Shinn did not become a saint. Instead, she stumbled upon a mechanical, almost shockingly simple protocol, a psychological and spiritual lever that completely rewired her relationship with failure, error, and the past. She discovered how to look directly into the mirror of her deepest mistakes without flinching, without setting up permanent camp in the squalor of regret, and without bleeding her vital life force into the phantom ghosts of yesterday. To understand the mechanics of the Shinn Protocol, one must strip away the sentimental veneer of modern positive thinking and examine the rigorous philosophy of emotional non-attachment. Why do human beings instinctively cling to their past mistakes as if they were precious heirlooms, and how does the release of those mistakes instantly recalibrate the electromagnetic field of manifestation? To answer this, one must deploy recursive thinking. Ask why the ego uses guilt as a substitute for true redemption, and then ask how absolute self-acceptance acts as a total system reset for the human electrical circuit. When an individual commits an error, the ego immediately manufactures a complex narrative of perpetual penance. The subconscious mind reasons that by suffering emotionally over a past failure, one is somehow paying a cosmic debt, balancing a moral ledger, or proving one's inherent worthiness to the universe. This is a profound philosophical error. The universe is not a debt collector tracking moral infractions with a red ledger pen. It is a mechanical mirror reflecting your current vibrational frequency. When you strap yourself to the rack of past failures, you are broadcasting a continuous, low-frequency distress signal. You are telling reality, I am a broken vessel. I am defined by my worst moments. I am untrustworthy. How does the Shinn Protocol shatter this destructive loop? Through the rigorous application of absolute present-moment accountability combined with immediate, radical release. When Shinn made an error, she practiced a three-step mechanical sequence. First, she looked at the mistake with unblinking, cold objectivity. She did not rationalize it, minimize it, or blame external forces. Second, if the error impacted another human being, she made immediate, concrete amends without theatrical self-pity. Third, and this is the absolute crux of the protocol, she refused to live there. Why is this third step so transformative? Because it cuts off the power supply to the past. Imagine a massive hydroelectric dam powering a sprawling city. If the operators of the dam intentionally divert half of the rushing water away from the turbines and let it spill uselessly into the dry desert sand of old regrets, the city experiences a brownout. The lights flicker, the machinery slows to a crawl. The human mind, operating in a state of unheeded guilt, is diverting its creative current into the desert of yesterday. When you apply the Shinn Protocol, you seal the breach in the dam. You acknowledge that given the exact level of consciousness, emotional maturity, and environmental pressure operating at the moment of the mistake, you did the absolute best that version of you was capable of executing. Not the best in an abstract, godlike ideal, but the best that specific, flawed, evolving human vessel could muster at that coordinate in time. The moment you accept this reality, the emotional friction vanishes, the vibrational static ceases. The diverted water rushes back into the turbines, and your entire energetic field surges with clean, undivided power. To witness the devastatingly effective mechanics of the Shinn Protocol in action, consider the historical account of Master Christopher, a master shipwright in the royal dockyards of 17th century Amsterdam. Christopher was a craftsman of legendary skill, but his early years were marred by a catastrophic professional failure. Entrusted with building the Crown's flagship galleon, Christopher made a critical miscalculation in the timber seasoning process. Months later, during its maiden voyage in open sea, the mainmast splintered under a heavy gale, forcing the ship to limp back to harbor in public humiliation. The dockmasters fined Christopher heavily, and the city gossips whispered of his incompetence. For 2 years, Christopher sank into a state of profound psychological paralysis. He rented a small, damp shed far from the shipyards, refusing new commissions. Every waking hour was consumed by the memory of the splintered mast. He would wake in a cold sweat, muttering, "I ruined the Crown's trust. I am a fraud. I have no right to touch timber again." He spent his days redrawing the blueprints of that fateful ship, torturing himself with hypothetical scenarios where he made different choices. His hands grew calloused from inactivity, his health withered, and his spirit was chained to the bottom of the ocean. One evening, a wandering street preacher handed Christopher a small, tattered pamphlet containing the foundational insights of what would later be known as the Shinn Protocol. The words struck Christopher like a physical blow. "Thou shalt not set up camp in the valley of thy past missteps, for the universe flows only through the living present." Christopher stared at the page for hours. For the first time in 2 years, the internal courtroom trial ground to a halt. He realized with startling clarity that when he built that doomed galleon, he had used the exact level of knowledge, patience, and materials available to that younger, less experienced version of himself. He had not sabotaged the ship maliciously. He had simply reached the absolute limit of his awareness at that time. The next morning, Christopher did something extraordinary. He took his old journals of self-reproach, carried them out to the back alley, and burned them to ashes. He did not deny the mast had broken. He simply stopped feeding the ghost of the broken mast with his life force. When the local merchants approached him weeks later to oversee the repair of a damaged merchant brig, Christopher did not shrink away with apologies. He walked into the dry dock with upright posture, examined the timber with clear, unclouded eyes, and issued instructions with absolute, calm authority. His work on that brig was a masterpiece of structural integrity. Within 5 years, Christopher was appointed Chief Royal Shipwright, his name synonymous with safety, innovation, and unbreakable hulls. The splintered mast had not destroyed his career, his relentless self-prosecution had nearly destroyed it. The moment he dropped the burden of shame, his genius flowed unimpeded once more. The Shinn Protocol is not a comforting psychological trick, it is an energetic law. So long as you carry the heavy baggage of your past failures, your hands are too full to grasp the magnificent opportunities that the present moment is trying to place in your palms. To embody this truth today, you must execute the protocol in your own life right now. Bring to mind one past mistake, professional failure, or personal misstep that still carries a subtle, lingering sting of embarrassment or guilt. Bring it into the theater of your mind, look at it directly without flinching, and say inwardly, "Given the consciousness I possessed at that exact moment, I did the best I could. I release the debt, I close the ledger." Feel the physical sensation of dropping an invisible iron weight from your shoulders. Notice how your breathing deepens and your mental clarity sharpens. The energy that was previously locked in the quicksand of self-loathing is now entirely yours to command. Forgiveness of the self is not an act of emotional indulgence. It is the ultimate act of energetic hygiene required to clear your channel for manifestation. Take a moment to anchor this transformation. We have cleared the static. We have shattered the weaponized mirror. We have forged the protocol of absolute alignment. Now, we stand at the precipice of a much larger revelation. In the next chapter, we transition from internal clearing to external mastery, examining the true archetype of power when goodness and absolute certainty unite in a single vessel. The path is open. The channel is clear. Proceed to Chapter 5. The afternoon sun cuts through the smog of a modern metropolis, casting long, bruised shadows across the asphalt. In the center of a bustling public square, two distinct archetypes of humanity cross paths, perfectly encapsulating the eternal theater of power. To the left walks a figure molded by the old, decaying paradigm, the ruthless corporate titan. Dressed in a bespoke Italian suit that costs more than an average family's annual earnings, this individual strides forward with an aggressive, predatory gait. Their eyes dart incessantly from side to side, scanning the environment not with appreciation, but with suspicion. Every muscle in their face is locked in a permanent, defensive scowl. They are surrounded by sycophants and protected by private security, yet they project an aura of profound, suffocating isolation. They are a monument to fear-based dominance, a person who has climbed to the summit of financial success by stepping on throats, only to discover that the summit is a freezing, lonely cage built entirely of paranoia and distrust. To the right, moving through the same crowd with an entirely different geometry of presence, walks an individual of a newly emerging species. This person wears no armor, employs no bodyguards, and carries no outward symbols of aggressive dominion. Yet, as they move, the crowd subtly parts not out of terror, but out of an instinctive, magnetic reverence. Their posture is completely upright, their shoulders relaxed, and their gaze is steady, warm, and utterly unshakable. They possess a quiet, luminous certainty that radiates into the surrounding space, like a low-frequency hum of absolute authority. Observe this contrast with meticulous care. For centuries, human civilization has operated under the hypnotic delusion that power is synonymous with ruthlessness. We have been taught that to conquer the world, one must become a monster, that kindness is a fatal vulnerability, and that true strength is forged only in the furnace of unmitigated greed. Yet, look closely at the modern landscape. The old model of ruthless ambition is cracking under its own weight. It is collapsing into scandals, sudden bankruptcies, and hollow, desolate lives. Simultaneously, a new paradigm is quietly stepping into the light. Individuals who carry both absolute internal certainty and unshakable goodness. When these two seemingly contradictory forces, power and integrity, strength and humility, fuse within a single human vessel, they create a force so coherent, so devastatingly effective, that the old, fear-driven model simply dissolves in its presence. To dissect the architecture of undivided power, one must abandon the simplistic dichotomy that pits virtue against strength. Why has humanity spent millennia believing that one must choose between being a good person and being a powerful force in the material world? To answer this, one must deploy recursive thinking. Ask why the ego equates power with domination, and then ask how true, aligned power transcends the ego entirely through the mechanical convergence of burning desire and zero internal resistance. When Napoleon Hill spent decades studying the habits of history's most successful industrialists, he famously isolated the principle of a burning desire. But popular culture grossly misinterprets this principle. People assume a burning desire is merely an obsessive, frantic hunger for wealth, driven by a desperate need to prove one's worth to a critical world. That is not burning desire, that is psychological compensation. True burning desire, when stripped of egoic desperation, is an act of pure, unadulterated alignment. It is a state where the individual's personal will completely merges with the expansive, creative current of the universe itself. Why does the ruthless person ultimately fail to achieve this level of power? Because ruthlessness is anchored in deep, foundational fear. The ruthless person grabs, manipulates, and exploits because deep down they believe the universe is scarce, hostile, and fundamentally unsafe. Their ambition is a frantic defense mechanism against their own internal terror of irrelevance and vulnerability. Therefore, their energy is perpetually divided between conquering external enemies and suppressing internal panic. How does the aligned individual operate by contrast? When absolute certainty pairs with genuine goodness, the internal architecture becomes entirely unified. There is no hidden panic, no defensive paranoia, and no moral contradiction. The individual wants what they want not to feed a wounded ego, but because their vision is a natural expression of their evolving soul. When you combine a burning desire with zero internal resistance, meaning no self-doubt, no guilt, no second-guessing, and no ethical compromises that violate your core spirit, you become a laser of pure consciousness. The universe, acting as a massive, impartial amplification system, does not ask if you are a saint or a sinner. It responds solely to the purity of the transmission. And when power is channeled through a clean, undivided vessel rooted in universal harmony, it acquires a magnitude that fear-based ruthlessness can never touch, because fear always contains the seed of its own destruction, while alignment carries the infinite momentum of reality itself. To witness the terrifying mechanical superiority of aligned power over brute force, one must look past modern boardrooms and examine the timeless historical account of the Valley of Elah, the classic confrontation between the shepherd boy David and the giant warrior Goliath. In every cultural retelling, this account is reduced to a comforting children's fable about the underdog triumphing through miraculous divine intervention. But when examined through the lens of energetic mechanics, the story reveals a masterclass in the laws of consciousness and power. Stand for a moment on the ancient battlefield. On one side looms Goliath, the epitome of the old, fear-based paradigm of power. He is encased head to toe in thick bronze armor that weighs more than a grown man. He carries a spear like a weaver's beam, and his voice booms across the valley with threats of physical annihilation. Goliath's power is entirely externalized. It is built upon intimidation, physical mass, military technology, and the trembling terror of the Philistine and Israelite armies who watch him. Yet beneath his towering bronze exterior, Goliath is trapped in an egoic cage of immense vulnerability. His pride is fragile, his identity depends entirely on absolute dominance, and his entire existence is a defense against the humiliation of defeat. Now look across the field at David. David is a teenager, unarmored, wearing a simple linen tunic, carrying no sword, and holding only a wooden shepherd's staff and a leather sling. Every conventional metric of warfare dictates that David is walking into his own immediate slaughter. As David walks toward the giant, observe his internal state. Does he harbor self-doubt? Does he run an internal committee questioning his worthiness to face a warrior? Does he suffer from vibrational static? Not for a single fraction of a second. David's internal world is utterly terrifyingly clear. He is not fighting to inflate his ego, build a reputation, or prove his dominance. He is anchored in an absolute, unshakable certainty of his connection to something infinitely greater than himself. His mind is a pristine, undivided mirror. There is zero resistance between his intention and his action. When David swings the leather sling, the stone does not find Goliath's forehead because of a lucky atmospheric gust. The stone strikes its mark because the absolute, laser-like coherence of David's internal state bends reality to accommodate his intent. Goliath's massive bronze armor, his heavy spear, and his terrifying physical bulk are rendered utterly impotent against a force that operates on a completely different plane of reality. The giant crashes into the dust not because physical strength is evil, but because fear-based power, no matter how massive its appearance, is structurally hollow when pitted against a clean, undivided channel of universal alignment. The story of David and Goliath is not an ancient relic. It is the exact blueprint for how you must approach your own life, your career, and your ambitions today. So long as you believe that power requires you to put on the heavy, clanking bronze armor of ruthlessness, anxiety, and ego defense, you will remain weighed down, slow, and perpetually terrified of a bigger giant stepping out of the shadows. To embody this truth today, you must shed the armor that does not belong to you. Identify where you are relying on force, manipulation, or overexertion to achieve your goals, rather than leaning into clear, unshakable alignment. Ask yourself, where am I operating from fear rather than conviction? Strip away the frantic need to prove yourself to a world that judges by external appearances. Cultivate the quiet, terrifyingly powerful certainty that when your internal world is unified, no external obstacle can withstand your trajectory. Real power does not need to raise its voice, flex its muscles, or intimidate its rivals. It simply occupies its space with such absolute clarity that reality adjusts itself to make room for it. Breathe in this realization. Feel the profound dignity of stepping out of the old paradigm of ruthless competition and into the radiant architecture of aligned power. If this chapter has awakened a new standard of strength within your consciousness, ensure you are subscribed, and have your notification bell turned on. For the road ahead calls us to examine the very nature of those who try to build empires on fear alone. We have dismantled the myth of the ruthless victor. In the next chapter, we descend into the fragile, hollow interior of the empire of fear, exposing why every structure built on manipulation carries the precise, ticking clock of its own spectacular collapse. The armor has fallen, the stone is in the sling. Proceed to Chapter 6. The air in the grand stone chamber is thick with the scent of burning cedar and the tense, suppressed breath of courtiers who dare not raise their eyes. Upon a raised dais sits the most absolute, temporal authority of the ancient world, Pharaoh. Adorned in heavy gold leaf, lapis lazuli, and the twin crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, he holds the ultimate power of life and death over millions. Every word he utters is law. Every gesture can elevate a slave to a governor or cast a noble into the crocodile-infested waters of the Nile. Standing before the throne is a solitary figure. He wears no crown, commands no battalion, and holds no weapon. His garments are simple, travel-stained linen, and his hands are calloused from decades of tending sheep in the desolate wilderness of Midian. His name is Moses. By all conventional metrics of power, this confrontation is an absurdity, a pathetic mismatch between the ultimate embodiment of worldly dominance and a wandering exile. Yet, observe the posture of the man in linen. He does not cower, he does not flatter the tyrant, nor does he tremble before the assembled ranks of royal guards. His gaze is level, burning with a quiet, incandescent certainty. When he opens his mouth, his voice does not shake. It resonates through the vaulted marble halls with the force of an oncoming tempest. In every culture down through the centuries, human language has suffered a catastrophic translation error regarding this exact archetype. Society looks at figures like Moses, or at the quiet, unshakable composure of historical avatars who faced down empires with a word, and mislabels them with a fatal word, meek. In modern vernacular, meek has been degraded to mean weak, submissive, passive, and spineless, the eternal doormat of human society, destined to be walked over by the bold and the ruthless. People hear the ancient promise that the meek shall inherit the earth, and they chuckle bitterly, assuming it is a comforting narcotic invented to keep the oppressed docile in their chains. This is a profound, civilization-wide misunderstanding. True meekness is not weakness. It is the most terrifying, concentrated form of strength known to the cosmos. True meekness is strength under absolute, conscious control. It is the dormant volcano that chooses to nourish the valley with wildflowers rather than bury it in lava, yet retains the precise capacity to shatter mountains when the hour demands it. To understand meekness is to understand the supreme mechanics of power. It is the realization that true force does not scream, dominate, or coerce, because it is anchored directly to the unshakable bedrock of reality itself. To dissect the true philosophy of meekness, one must abandon superficial cultural definitions and apply rigorous recursive thinking. Why has humanity spent millennia confusing gentleness with fragility, and how does true meekness actually operate as a supreme amplifier of manifestation? To answer this, one must ask, why does the ego feel an obsessive need to project loud, aggressive dominance? And how does the dissolution of that egoic noise unlock a level of power that empires cannot conquer? When an individual operates from the ego, their power must be constantly performed. They must shout to be heard, intimidate to be respected, and hoard control to feel secure. This externalized performance is a dead giveaway of deep internal weakness. It is the psychological equivalent of a fragile animal puffing its fur to appear larger to a predator. True meekness completely inverts this paradigm. The truly meek individual has completely transcended the egoic need for external validation or forced dominance. Their identity is not anchored in their social status, their bank account, or their ability to subjugate others. Their consciousness is anchored directly to the infinite source of all creation. Why does this make them an unstoppable force? Because when you no longer care about defending your personal ego, you stop generating vibrational static. Your mind becomes an open, transparent lens through which universal power can flow unhindered. Consider the mechanics of water. Water is the most yielding, gentle, and seemingly meek element on earth. It takes the shape of any vessel, flows around any obstacle, and offers no rigid resistance when struck. Yet, what happens when water accumulates momentum, or when it is compressed into a high-pressure stream? It slices through solid steel, carves out colossal canyons in granite, and moves with a kinetic devastation that no army can stop. True meekness is the human embodiment of water. It is absolute flexibility combined with an unyielding, unbreakable core. When Moses stood before Pharaoh, he was not relying on his own personal willpower or military might. He had become a clear channel for universal law. He was simply the instrument through which reality reorganized itself. When you embody this level of meekness, you stop fighting the world. You stop forcing outcomes through manipulation and stress. You align yourself with the underlying current of existence, and when you finally speak or act, your intent carries the entire momentum of the universe behind it. The ruthless person breaks against you like a wave smashing uselessly against a cliff of solid diamond. To witness the devastating, explosive reality of true meekness in action, one must examine the historical account of the cleansing of the temple in Jerusalem. The outer courts of the temple had been transformed into a corrupt, chaotic bazaar. Greedy money changers and animal merchants had turned the sacred sanctuary into a den of extortion, exploiting the poor pilgrims who came to offer sacrifices. The atmosphere was loud, greasy, and saturated with the stench of commercial greed and institutional corruption. For months, the religious authorities, men draped in rich vestments who held absolute legal and social power over the populace, watched this degradation with cold indifference, profiting handsomely from the corruption. Into this noisy marketplace walked Jesus of Nazareth. By all physical appearances, he was a meek wanderer from a despised province, a carpenter with no political office, no wealth, and no armed guards. For 3 years, his ministry had been characterized by radical compassion, forgiveness, patience, and profound humility. He healed the sick, comforted the broken, and spoke with a gentle, disarming grace that drew children to his side. The merchants and money changers barely glanced up as he entered. They assumed he was just another impoverished pilgrim. Then, something extraordinary occurred. With absolute, terrifying calm, Jesus took up cords and wove them into a whip. There was no theatrical screaming, no loss of emotional control, and no frantic posturing. His internal state was completely unified, anchored in an unshakable alignment with universal truth. When he moved into the courtyard, an invisible wave of raw, unadulterated authority preceded him. The money changers froze in their tracks. As he began overturning the heavy wooden tables, sending silver and bronze coins clattering wildly across the stone pavement, and driving the merchants out with the whip, a profound terror seized the entire assembly. Consider this paradox. Why did armed temple guards, corrupt priests accustomed to exercising absolute tyranny, and ruthless businessmen not immediately draw their daggers and slaughter this solitary carpenter? Because they were paralyzed by the sheer, overwhelming frequency of true meekness. They were face to face with a power that did not originate from ego, fear, or worldly violence. It was power under total, divine control, a force so pure and absolute that it made their institutional authority look like a fragile house of cards. They fled the courtyard like children, terrified of the blazing, righteous clarity emanating from a man who had spent his life washing his disciples' feet. Meekness had entered the temple, and the empire of greed scattered before it in utter ruin. The transformation from aggressive force to true meekness is the ultimate evolution of human consciousness. So long as you believe that you must raise your voice, manipulate your circumstances, or dominate others to secure your place in the world, you are operating from the frantic, exhaustible energy of the ego. To embody this truth today, you must examine where you are forcing outcomes in your life through anxiety and control. Identify the areas where you feel you must fight, argue, or hustle to prove your worth. Strip away that frantic armor. Practice the art of radical, unshakable composure in the face of pressure. When conflict arises, do not match the aggression of others with your own counter-aggression. Stand completely still. Anchor your awareness in something infinitely greater than the immediate crisis. Let your presence become heavy, calm, and unmistakably certain. You will discover that true power does not need to shout. Its mere presence commands absolute silence. True meekness is the quiet confidence of a soul that knows it is supported by the infinite machinery of reality, requiring no external validation to prove its sovereign authority. Take a deep breath. Feel the absolute stillness of this realized strength settling into your bones. We have redefined strength. We have unmasked the illusion of aggressive dominance. Now, we must examine the ultimate destination of the alternative path. In the next chapter, we descend into the hidden psychology of the ruthless path, exposing why every empire built on fear carries the precise, ticking clock of its own spectacular collapse. The whip is woven. The tables are turning. Proceed to Chapter 7. The penthouse apartment occupies the highest tier of a towering glass monolith overlooking a financial district glittering with synthetic neon. From this dizzying altitude of 80 stories, the city below looks like an intricate circuit board of crawling lights and tiny, insignificant ant-like figures. Inside the sprawling penthouse, the air is meticulously temperature-controlled, scented with expensive sandalwood, and insulated from the chaotic clamor of the streets. At the center of this cavernous room stands a man who commands global markets, whose signature can bankrupt corporations, and whose wealth is measured in billions. Yet, observe his physical state. He paces across the imported Persian rug with the frantic, jerky rhythm of a caged animal. His eyes are hollow, bruised by chronic insomnia, and his fingers tremble as he reaches for a crystal tumbler of amber spirits. Every door in this fortress is reinforced with steel. Every member of his private domestic staff is bound by suffocating non-disclosure agreements, and his smartphone hums incessantly with encrypted security briefings. He trusts no one. He suspects that his business partners are plotting his ouster, that his attorneys are embezzling from his shell companies, and that the sycophants laughing at his jokes at elite banquets are merely waiting for the exact second his empire stumbles so they can plunge a dagger into his back. He is sitting atop the pinnacle of worldly success, yet he is living out his days inside a maximum security prison of his own meticulous construction. Watch this paradox closely. For generations, humanity has marveled at the lightning-fast rise of the ruthless. We watch the corrupt executive, the manipulative politician, and the exploitative titan ascend to staggering heights with an acceleration that leaves ethical observers gasping in despair. We see their mansions, their private jets, and their untouchable legal shields, and we whisper that crime pays, that the wicked inherit the earth, and that morality is nothing more than a nostalgic luxury for the weak. Yet, look deeper beneath the glittering veneer of the ruthless path. History reveals a relentless, unbroken pattern. The empire built on fear, manipulation, and exploitation works brilliantly right up until the exact millisecond it catastrophically implodes. The collapse is never a slow, graceful decline. It is a spectacular, earth-shattering implosion that leaves nothing behind save for scorched earth and a legacy coded in universal contempt. To dissect the terminal decay of the ruthless path, one must abandon surface-level observations and apply rigorous recursive thinking. Why does power constructed through fear invariably contain the exact genetic code of its own destruction? And how does the psychological reality of the ruthless mind forge an internal prison that no amount of external wealth can ever unlock? To answer this, one must ask, why must the ruthless individual constantly escalate their control? And how does that escalating control warp the fundamental fabric of their consciousness? When an individual builds their success by exploiting others, lying, and stepping on human lives, they fundamentally alter their relationship with reality. They adopt a core philosophical baseline. The universe is a hostile, zero-sum battlefield where everyone is an enemy waiting to destroy me. Because this is their foundational belief, their entire external empire becomes an exercise in defensive fortification. Every dollar earned, every competitor crushed, and every law manipulated is an attempt to wall off an internal terror that can never be appeased. Why does this system inevitably collapse? Because fear-based power requires an infinite expenditure of energy to maintain. If your authority rests on intimidation, you must become more terrifying each day to keep your subordinates from rebelling. If your wealth rests on deception, you must weave more intricate webs of lies to prevent the truth from surfacing. Eventually, a mathematical and spiritual threshold is crossed. The energy required to maintain the illusion exceeds the energy available in the universe. Consider the energetic mechanics of this state. As explored in earlier chapters, reality responds to vibrational clarity and internal alignment. The ruthless person's internal world is a churning vortex of paranoia, guilt, suppression, and hypervigilance. They are broadcasting a frequency of absolute terror disguised as arrogance. The universe, acting as an impartial amplification system, reflects the terror back to them magnified 1,000-fold. The paranoid king attracts the assassin, the deceptive CEO attracts the whistleblower, the exploitative titan attracts the systemic market correction. The collapse is not a stroke of bad luck or a delayed act of moral karma. It is the inevitable mathematical outcome of a structure built on a foundation of sand, vibrating at the exact frequency of its own collapse. To witness the architectural flaw of the ruthless path played out on a grand historical canvas, consider the account of the ancient Eastern potentate King Darius of the Median Plateau. Darius was a master of political maneuvering and military ruthlessness. Through a series of swift assassinations, broken treaties, and merciless purges of his political rivals, he united a vast empire under his absolute, undisputed sway. No man dared look him in the eye, no courtier spoke unless bidden, and his treasury overflowed with gold extorted from vassal provinces. To secure his throne, Darius constructed the citadel of Irona, a colossal fortress perched upon an inaccessible cliffside, guarded by mercenary legions whose loyalty was purchased entirely through exorbitant bribes and the threat of immediate torture. From this impregnable perch, Darius surveyed his dominion and smiled, believing he had conquered the capricious laws of fate through sheer, unmitigated terror. Yet, observe what was happening inside the citadel of iron. Because Darius trusted no one, he personally inspected every shipment of food, interviewed every servant in secret, and slept with a drawn dagger beneath his silken pillow. He had created a system where honesty was punished and sycophancy was rewarded. Consequently, his inner circle was populated entirely by opportunistic parasites who whispered whatever lies kept their own heads attached to their shoulders. When a minor regional drought threatened grain supplies in the outer provinces, Darius's corrupt governors, terrified of reporting bad news to a tyrant who executed bearers of ill tidings, falsified their agricultural reports. They told the king that the granaries were overflowing. Darius, insulated by his fortress of fear, believed them. He continued his lavish building projects, squeezing the populace for heavier taxes to fund his monuments. The collapse, when it arrived, did not come from an invading foreign army. It came from within the rotten core of his own system. A trusted chamberlain, realizing that Darius's paranoia had reached a pitch where his own life was forfeit on the whim of a waking nightmare, slipped through the iron gates at midnight and opened the fortress doors to a coalition of desperate citizens and disgruntled mercenaries. There was no epic battle. The mighty citadel of iron crumbled in a single night because every pillar holding it up was made of rotting wood painted to look like steel. Darius was dragged from his bed not as a god-king, but as a terrified, isolated old man, stripped of everything save for the bitter realization that an empire built on fear is nothing more than a tomb waiting for its occupant. The collapse of the ruthless empire is a profound universal lesson for anyone tempted to take the easy, unethical shortcut. Every time you compromise your core integrity for a quick gain, every time you step over another human being to secure an advantage, and every time you build an achievement upon deception, you are laying a brick in a prison cell that you will eventually be forced to inhabit. To embody this truth today, you must audit your ambitions. Examine your current projects, professional goals, and personal strategies. Ask yourself with brutal honesty, am I building this through manipulation, fear, and shortcuts, or am I building this through genuine value, integrity, and clean alignment? If you find traces of the ruthless shortcut in your methodology, dismantle it now before the universe does it for you. Release the need for immediate, manipulative wins. Understand that playing the short game of exploitation always ends in the trap of the penthouse prison. A shortcut taken at the expense of your character is not a path forward, it is a detour straight into a labyrinth of your own defensive paranoia. Take a steadying breath. Feel the liberating relief of letting go of the exhausting need to control, manipulate, and dominate your reality. We have unmasked the fragile empire of now. We must examine how to forge the alternative, the unbreakable strength of long-term character development. In the next chapter, we descend into the master craftsman's forge, exploring why the slow, patient path of integrity compounds into a power that no market crash or changing circumstance can ever touch. The fortress doors are swinging wide. Proceed to Chapter 8. The digital marketplace of the modern age hums with a relentless, dizzying velocity. Smartphone screens flash with endless notifications promising overnight wealth, instant algorithmic fame, automated dropshipping empires, and guaranteed passive income streams requiring zero effort. In this hyper-accelerated epoch, patience is treated as an obsolete relic, and the slow, agonizing climb of traditional mastery is openly mocked as a fool's errand. Picture a young entrepreneur sitting in a sleek, rented co-working space. Before him glow dual monitors displaying skyrocketing metrics from a controversial, high-risk marketing campaign. He has cut every conceivable ethical corner, exaggerated his product's capabilities, exploited legal loopholes, and utilized aggressive, manipulative funnels to extract capital from an unsuspecting consumer base. His bank account is swelling by the hour. He leans back in his ergonomic chair, sneering at the old-fashioned artisans and ethical business owners who spend decades building products with care, integrity, and meticulous attention to detail. Look at them, he tells himself with a smirk, working themselves to the bone for pennies while I crack the code of the modern world. Yet, zoom forward in time past the glamorous social media posts, past the temporary flash of inflated valuations. Observe what happens when a sudden economic downturn hits the market, or when a regulatory crackdown exposes the hollow foundation of his automated empire. The collapse is instantaneous. His ad accounts are banned, his payment processors freeze his assets, his customer base floods the internet with scathing exposures, and the empire built on quick fixes evaporates like morning mist on hot asphalt. Watch this paradox closely. Society is perpetually seduced by the siren song of the shortcut. We are conditioned to crave the microwavable victory, the instant lottery win, and the rapid hack that bypasses the crucible of trial and error. Yet, the fundamental laws of reality operate on an entirely different cadence. Every shortcut you take is quietly cheating you out of the very transformation required to sustain success. The quick fix gives you the illusion of power while keeping you structurally weak, like a house built of painted cardboard waiting for the first autumn gale. The long game, the patient, unglamorous, often lonely path of integrity, discipline, and character-building forges an internal strength that no market crash, regulatory shift, or changing circumstance can ever touch. To dissect the profound mechanics of the long game, one must apply rigorous recursive thinking. Why does the human mind desperately chase shortcuts despite all historical evidence proving their ultimate futility? And how does the slow, deliberate forging of character create a compounding energetic momentum in the physical world? To answer this, one must ask, why does the ego demand immediate gratification? And how does submitting to the friction of long-term discipline fundamentally alter the electrical conductivity of human consciousness? When an individual seeks a shortcut, they are operating from a deep-seated scarcity mindset. The ego whispers, there is not enough time, resources, or opportunity. You must grab what you can right now before it disappears. This panic-driven urgency forces the individual to bypass the natural developmental cycles of growth. Consider the laws of nature. A mighty oak tree does not sprout overnight through a clever growth hack. It spends decades enduring fierce winter gales, baking under scorching summer droughts, and driving its roots deep into the silent, rocky earth. It is precisely the struggle against resistance that forces the oak to lay down dense, interwoven rings of hardwood. If you force a sapling to grow unnaturally fast in a greenhouse with chemical fertilizers, its trunk will be bloated, hollow, and structurally useless when the first real storm arrives. Why does the human character follow the exact same botanical law? When you choose the long game, when you honor your commitments even when no one is watching, when you refuse to compromise your integrity for a quick payday, and when you patiently master your craft through years of disciplined execution, you are building energetic hardwood within your consciousness. What is the mechanical result of this internal hardening? You eliminate vibrational static. The person who takes shortcuts is constantly looking over their shoulder, worrying that their lies will be exposed, managing the anxiety of their fraudulent foundation. Their energy is hopelessly fragmented. The person playing the long game possesses absolute internal peace. They have nothing to hide, no fabricated stories to maintain, and no fear of exposure. Their signal is clean, dense, and immensely powerful. When compounding character meets the impartial amplification system of the universe, the results are staggering. While the shortcut artist burns out in a blazing flash of temporary notoriety, the person of true character builds a compounding momentum that gathers unstoppable force with every passing decade, creating a legacy that outlives generations. To witness the profound contrast between the quick alloy and the master's blade, one must look to the ancient historical accounts of sword-making in feudal Japan, specifically the legendary workshops of the master smiths. During a period of civil unrest, two distinct smiths supplied weapons to the provincial lords. The first smith, known as Master Hideo, represented the philosophy of the quick shortcut. Eager to maximize his profits and flood the market with weapons to meet the frantic wartime demand, Hideo altered the traditional forging process. Instead of folding the high-grade Tamahagan steel 12 times, hammering out impurities through days of grueling labor, he poured cheap, brittle pig iron into hasty molds, quenched them rapidly in cold water, and polished the exterior until they gleamed with a dazzling, deceptive mirror finish. When the lords inspected Hideo's swords in the sunlight, they marveled at their low cost and brilliant sheen. Hideo grew fabulously wealthy in a matter of months, mocking the traditional smiths for their antiquated, slow methods. The second smith, Master Kenji, adhered strictly to the ancient, agonizingly slow path of mastery. Kenji selected his ores with meticulous care. He folded his steel over and over through thousands of hammer blows, subjecting the metal to intense, controlled heating and patient cooling cycles. Weeks of back-breaking labor went into a single blade. His output was small, his prices were high, and impatient buyers often walked away in frustration, calling him an eccentric traditionalist who did not understand modern efficiency. Then came the Battle of the Mountain Pass. The lords who purchased Hideo's gleaming, cheaply cast swords marched into combat with absolute confidence. But at the first violent clash of steel against heavy armor, the flaws in Hideo's quick alloy manifested catastrophically. The blades shattered instantly into 1,000 jagged shards, leaving the warriors defenseless and leading to a devastating rout. Master Kenji's swords, tested in the exact same furnace of combat, did not break, bend, or lose their razor edge. They sliced through armor with terrifying precision, carrying the warriors to victory. The lords who bought the shortcuts lost everything in a single afternoon. Kenji's name echoed through history, becoming synonymous with unbreakable strength, enduring quality, and absolute sovereign mastery. The quick alloy crumbles under pressure. The patient steel endures eternity. The lesson of the forge applies directly to the architecture of your life today. Every time you are tempted to take the unethical shortcut, to inflate your credentials, to compromise your values for a rapid gain, or to avoid the hard work of genuine skill acquisition, I remember the shattered blades of the quick alloy. To embody this truth today, you must consciously commit to playing the long game in your profession, your relationships, and your personal evolution. Identify one area in your life where you have been looking for a quick fix or a clever hack. Pause, breathe out the frantic urgency of the ego, and deliberately choose the slower, harder path of absolute integrity and mastery. Embrace the friction of the process. Understand that the resistance you feel today is not a punishment. It is the exact heat forging your internal hardwood. The shortcuts you refuse to take are often the very boundaries that protect your soul from implosion. Play for the centuries, not for the afternoon. Take a deep breath. Feel the profound stability of anchoring your life in enduring principles rather than fleeting trends. We have explored the metallurgy of character. Now, we must bring these timeless principles down into the messy, high-pressure arena of daily existence. In the next chapter, we descend into the boardroom crossroads, examining how to maintain absolute energetic clarity and unshakable integrity when the pressure hits and everyone around you is lunging for the easy way out. The forge is glowing. The steel is ready. Proceed to Chapter 9. The digital clock on the mahogany boardroom wall glows a sharp, icy blue. 11:59 p.m. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, the city slumbers under a blanket of heavy, humid fog. But inside the executive suite, the air is electric with suppressed panic and the acrid scent of stale espresso. Around the polished mahogany table sit 5 senior executives. Their faces are illuminated by the harsh glare of laptops displaying alarming quarterly deficits. The company stands on the precipice of a disastrous public default. The board is staring down a catastrophic choice, and the lead executive, a man whose career and reputation hang by a thread, slides a confidential document across the table. It is a clever, highly sophisticated financial maneuver. It skirts the razor edge of legality. It involves burying toxic liabilities in an obscure offshore subsidiary, misleading institutional investors through creative accounting, and throwing a junior compliance officer under the bus as a scapegoat should auditors ever come knocking. The room falls into a profound, suffocating silence. Every eye turns toward the chief financial officer, a man known throughout the industry for his unshakable ethical standards. One by one, the other executives begin to lean in, whispering justifications coated in the pragmatic honey of modern survival. Everyone does it. It's just a temporary bridge. If we don't sign this, the company folds by morning and 500 people lose their jobs. Survival supersedes technicalities. The pressure in the room is immense, a crushing physical weight capable of bending steel beams. Every instinct of self-preservation screams at the CFO to nod, sign his name, take the golden parachute, and bury his conscience in the name of corporate utility. Observe this exact coordinate in time. This is the crucible. For all the beauty of high philosophical abstractions, spiritual laws, and majestic metaphors, truth is a useless ornament if it cannot survive the suffocating heat of a Tuesday afternoon boardroom crisis. It is easy to meditate on integrity when life is calm, resources are abundant, and no one is pointing a loaded pistol at your career. But reality tests its children in the furnace of immediate, high-stakes pressure. This is the moment where abstract theory must transform into concrete, unyielding action where the rubber meets the cosmic road. To dissect the mechanics of making aligned decisions under extreme pressure, one must apply rigorous recursive thinking. Why do human beings under duress almost instinctively abandon their core values for immediate relief? And how does maintaining absolute energetic clarity in that exact moment completely alter the downstream trajectory of reality? To answer this, one must ask, why does fear induce moral myopia? And how does the conscious mind short-circuit the panic loop to access higher-order clarity? When an individual faces on acute crisis such as financial ruin, public humiliation, or professional extinction, the primitive reptilian brain seizes absolute control of the nervous system. The amygdala floods the bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline, triggering a severe fight-or-flight response. In this physiological state of panic, the human horizon of perception collapses from decades down to the next 10 seconds. The brain becomes entirely myopic, demanding immediate, desperate relief regardless of long-term consequences. The unethical shortcut looks overwhelmingly attractive during a panic response because the primitive brain perceives it as an instant escape hatch from immediate pain. How does the practitioner of aligned power short-circuit this biological hijack? By executing a profound internal pause, a deliberate, conscious deceleration of consciousness amidst a storm of external acceleration. When the pressure peaks, the aligned individual does not react from panic. They step backward into the quiet, unshakable center of their own awareness. They recognize that panic is merely vibrational static designed to scramble their signal. Consider the mechanics of decision-making under high voltage. When you make a choice from a state of terror, you are broadcasting a chaotic, frantic frequency of scarcity. The universe, acting as an impartial amplification system, reflects that panic back to you by entangling you in increasingly disastrous circumstances. Conversely, when you anchor your awareness in absolute integrity and refuse to panic, when you look the crisis in the eye and state calmly, "We will find a true solution," or "We will fall with honor, but we will not compromise our foundation," something miraculous occurs. The internal static vanishes instantly. Your mind becomes a pristine optical lens, focusing creative intelligence that was previously blocked by fear. Solutions that were invisible to the panicked mind suddenly materialize. Reality bends not to accommodation through deception, but to the sheer, unbreakable gravity of a clean, coherent signal. To witness the staggering, compounding power of maintaining integrity inside the corporate crucible, one must examine the historical account of the maritime crisis faced by the Dutch East India Company's flagship trading post in Nagasaki during the late 17th century. A severe typhonic storm had wrecked a vast fleet of merchant galleons carrying the company's entire seasonal cargo of silk and porcelain. Compounding the disaster, a corrupt regional trade inspector approached the resident director, Master Willem, with an illicit proposition. The inspector whispered that if Willem agreed to falsify the manifest, bribing local officials and shifting the financial loss onto a smaller, rival merchant house in Yokohama, the inspector would instantly grant them exclusive trading monopolies for the next decade, saving the company from immediate bankruptcy. The council of merchants gathered around Willem, trembling with anxiety. They urged him to accept. "It is the only way," they pleaded. "The trade inspector holds all the cards. If we refuse, we are ruined." Willem sat in total silence. He looked at the fraudulent ledger prepared by the inspector. He felt the crushing weight of 500 families whose livelihoods depended on his signature. Every instinct of human fear tempted him to take the dark, easy path. Slowly, deliberately, Willem picked up a heavy brass pen, dipped it in ink, and pushed the fraudulent document away across the table. "We trade in truth or we do not trade at all," Willem said quietly, his voice devoid of anger, trembling, or theatrical posturing. "We will report the exact loss to the imperial court, and we will rebuild our capital through honest labor." The council gasped, certain they had just signed their own death warrant. The trade inspector flew into a rage, threatening them with total permanent banishment from the ports. Willem did not flinch. He did not panic, argue, or retaliate. He maintained total internal alignment, accepting the immediate financial blow with unshakable composure. What happened next stunned the mercantile world. When the imperial emperor independently audited the disaster months later, he discovered the corrupt inspector's long-standing web of extortion through the transparent, scrupulously honest disclosures submitted by Willem's house. The emperor was so profoundly struck by the rare, unblemished integrity of the Dutch director that he stripped the corrupt inspector of his title, executed his syndicate, and granted Willem's company an unprecedented, permanent imperial charter that made them the undisputed lords of Eastern trade for the next 50 years. The shortcut leads to the gallows. Absolute integrity, held firm in the crucible, unlocks empires. The boardroom crucible is not a rare historical anomaly. It is an everyday reality waiting for you at every major crossroad of your life. Every time you face a difficult choice where your ethics are weighed against your convenience, you are standing in Willem's shoes. To embody this truth today, you must prepare your nervous system for the fire before the fire even ignites. Establish your non-negotiable boundaries now. While the waters are calm, the next time an acute crisis strikes and the panic response threatens to hijack your mind, do not make an immediate decision from that state of terror. Stop. Breathe deeply into your center. Strip away the frantic need for a quick, dirty escape hatch. Ask yourself, what choice would I make if I knew with absolute certainty that the universe supports absolute integrity? Choose the clean path, hold your ground with absolute, unshakable meekness, and watch how reality reorganizes itself around your unwavering signal. Character is not formed in comfort. It is forged when the world demands that you compromise, and you quietly, devastatingly refuse. Take a deep breath. Feel the absolute bedrock of your integrity locking firmly into place beneath your feet. If this chapter has fortified your spine for the daily battles of life, ensure you are subscribed and have your notification bell turned on, for the journey we are traveling is reaching its magnificent culmination. We have tested the mettle of our choices in the furnace of daily pressure. Now, we stand at the final gate of our 1-0 chapter Odyssey. In the next chapter, we cross the threshold into the ultimate state of consciousness, living as an unbroken, effortless channel through which reality flows without resistance, fear, or division. The crucible has cooled into diamond. Proceed to Chapter 10. The dawn breaks over an ancient mountain pass, casting a pale, liquid gold light across a landscape that has witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. High above the timberline, where the air grows thin, crisp, and piercingly clear, a glacial river emerges from beneath a massive wall of blue-white ice. Watch this river with rapt attention. It does not argue with the boulders blocking its descent. It does not harbor self-doubt, panic over narrow gorges, or guilt about carving deep canyons into the unyielding stone. It does not waste a single drop of its immense kinetic energy trying to force its way upward or sideways against the laws of gravity. It simply yields, adapts, flows, and surrenders completely to the downward pull of the earth. Yet, observe the staggering, unimaginable power of this gentle flow. Over centuries, this soft, unresisting water grinds down solid granite mountains, powers colossal ancient mills, transforms arid deserts into lush paradises of cascading green, and rushes forward with an unstoppable, majestic momentum toward the infinite expanse of the ocean. Now, turn your gaze inward. For 9 chapters, we have dismantled the illusions of the matrix. We have looked into the dark mirror of vibrational static, shattered the courtroom of the weaponized mirror, executed the Shinn Protocol, and forged our character in the white-hot crucible of daily crisis. We have discarded the heavy, clanking bronze armor of ruthless ambition and embraced the devastating, quiet authority of true meekness. We stand now at the absolute summit of human consciousness. The struggle is over. The internal civil war between ambition and guilt has been permanently dissolved. You are no longer fighting reality, second-guessing your worth, or broadcasting white noise into the ether of existence. You have transformed from a fractured, confused ego frantically trying to manipulate the world into something infinitely more magnificent, an unbroken channel. To comprehend the ultimate state of the unbroken channel, one must apply the final layer of rigorous recursive thinking. Why do human beings spend their entire lives fighting the current of existence? And how does becoming an unbroken channel unlock a level of manifestation and peace that transcends all ordinary human comprehension? To answer this, one must ask, what is the fundamental source of human suffering and stagnation? And how does absolute surrender to universal laws create supreme personal sovereignty? The root cause of all human struggle is resistance. The ego believes it is an isolated island in a hostile ocean, compelled to fight, push, hustle, and manipulate reality to survive. Every time you push against the natural unfolding of life out of fear, greed, or anxiety, you create a dam in your own consciousness. That dam blocks the infinite current of creative intelligence flowing from the source of all things. When you practice the principles laid out in this manuscript, when you clear your vibrational static, forgive your past missteps, anchor your desires in absolute alignment, and maintain your integrity inside the fiery crucible, something alchemical occurs within your psychological and energetic architecture. The dam breaks, the internal walls collapse, and the separate, isolated ego merges seamlessly with the infinite river of universal intelligence. Why does this make you an unbroken channel? Because you no longer initiate action from a place of frantic personal lack. You act because the universal current is moving through you. When you desire creation, wealth, love, or leadership, that desire is no longer tainted by doubt or guilt. It is a pure, unclouded impulse originating from the divine machinery of reality itself. Consider the mechanics of an electrical superconductor. A superconductor offers zero resistance to electrical current. Consequently, electricity flows through it infinitely, producing no heat, no friction, and no waste. When you eliminate self-doubt, shame, and egoic resistance, your human vessel becomes an energetic superconductor. You do not need to force success. Success is pulled through you by the irresistible gravity of universal expansion. Opportunities appear effortlessly. Resources materialize precisely when required. Relationships align with miraculous synchronicity. You realize with breathtaking clarity that you were never meant to be the frantic laborer breaking rocks in the quarry. You were always meant to be the clear, radiant lens through which reality expresses its infinite abundance. To witness the supreme reality of the unbroken channel in historical manifestation, one must look to the legendary accounts of the master architects of ancient sacred geometries. The builders who constructed the cathedrals of Chartres and the great temples of antiquity without architectural blueprints in the modern sense, guided entirely by an unshakable, intuitive flow. Among them was Master Bernard, an architect whose name is whispered in historical chronicles not for his volume of output, but for the transcendent, jaw-dropping perfection of his final sanctuary. While other master builders spent their days shouting at laborers, arguing with fickle patrons, and agonizing over structural calculations with trembling anxiety, Bernard moved through the chaotic worksite with an eerie, radiant stillness. He did not rush. He did not panic when timber shipments were delayed, and he never raised his voice. When the cathedral's massive vaulted ceilings were raised, rival architects examined the arches with sheer disbelief. There were no visible stress fractures, no clumsy reinforcements, and no structural errors. The building stood as a living symphony of stone, capturing light and acoustics in a way that defied ordinary engineering logic. When a young apprentice knelt before Bernard and asked him for the secret of his infallible craftsmanship, Bernard smiled gently and pointed toward the nearby river. "I do not build the cathedral," Bernard whispered. "I merely listen to the stone. When my mind is quiet, when there is no voice inside me arguing with the design, the stone places itself. I am simply the hand that holds the chisel while the universe carves the temple." Bernard had ceased to be a struggling man trying to build a career. He had become an unbroken channel. His life was no longer a series of forced actions, but a continuous, effortless dance with reality. The universe built the cathedral through him because there was no internal static left in his vessel to stop it. You have arrived at the summit. The 10 chapters of this masterclass have stripped away the false programming, cleared the static, shattered the mirrors of shame, forged your character in the fire of crisis, and revealed the majestic architecture of true aligned power. To embody this final truth today, you must release the final vestige of control. Stop trying to push the river. Stop agonizing over your outcomes, second-guessing your worth, or plotting manipulative shortcuts. Breathe out all remaining tension. Anchor your awareness in the quiet, unshakable certainty that you are a clean, unbroken channel of infinite intelligence. Step into your daily life with the absolute poise of the glacial river yielding to no false obstacle, carrying the weight of mountains with effortless grace, and flowing steadily toward the vast, magnificent ocean of your highest destiny. When your channel is unbroken, you no longer seek power. Power seeks you, because reality itself longs to express its magnificence through a vessel at absolute peace. Feel the absolute silence and boundless expansion filling your chest. The transformation is complete. You are whole. You are clear. You are unbreakable. The channel is open. The current is flowing. Step forward into your true power and let the universe unfold through you.